This is Will Buchanan reporting for the Walk for Liberty. It's August 13th, 2008, day 105. So, with our Subaru up and running again, after having been fixed by the nice folks at the Subaru dealership in Billings, I'm continuing today with walking on past Forsyth, Montana, where we had been staying while waiting for our car to be fixed. After having had a 5-day break, I was pretty anxious this morning to continue walking again. Although we first wanted to stop at the offices of the local newspaper, the Independent Press. Not only to tell them about our Walk for Liberty across the country and how we were passing through Forsyth, but also to tell them about the great experience we've had with the people in and around Forsyth over the past 5 days. I'm particularly glad we stopped because the lady we talked to seemed to be really receptive to our ideas. One thing about having been in Billings the last couple days, waiting for our Subaru to get fixed, is that Brooke and I were able to spend some time alone together for our anniversary. And we did have a pretty good time there in Billings. And I do have an announcement to make on behalf of Brooke and myself. Sometime after we get to New Hampshire, Brooke and I will be getting divorced from the state. I realize you might be confused about what I mean by that. You see, when Brooke and I got married, like the vast majority of Americans, we got a government marriage. Which means that not only were we committing to each other, but also we were bringing this third party known as the government into the union. But why should government even be involved in marriage in the first place? From what I understand, government marriage wasn't even common before about the Civil War, and was only popularized by racists who were trying to prevent freed black men from marrying white women. That disgusting reason alone would be enough for me to rethink the whole idea of government marriage. Depending on your situation, there certainly could be advantages for having a government-recognized marriage. For one, if you have a company-sponsored health insurance plan, the health insurance company might not allow your spouse to be covered under your plan unless you have a government-recognized marriage. Although really, how many of those companies actually ask to see a government marriage certificate? Mine certainly didn't when Brooke was covered under my company health insurance plan for a while. And really, this is a problem caused by the government propagandizing the populace, including companies, that it is the only legitimate way to have a recognized marriage. Another reason might be for visitation rights if your significant other is in the hospital. Like the previous situation, this again is a problem caused by the fact that most of society thinks that government marriage is the only legitimate form of marriage. Although, I don't see why you couldn't have made up a notarized document ahead of time stating that you each give the other the right to see them in the hospital. And frankly, if you go to the hospital saying, "I'm here to see my wife," who's going to ask to see your government marriage certificate? Another reason is, if you file federal income taxes, there certainly can be tax advantages to having a government marriage. But this is yet another problem caused by the government in the first place, and that they're demanding to take part of your income. So the question is, are those potential advantages reason enough to get a government-approved marriage? Because there are arguments against government marriage as well. For me, now, the whole idea of getting a government marriage license, which is basically the government saying that you have permission to get married, is disgusting. Why should you have to beg them to have a union with another person when it really only needs to be between you and that other person? Another big reason not to involve government in your marriage is if it happens not to work out. If you don't have a government marriage and it happens not to work out, then you two can just each go your own separate ways. Even if you have circumstances such as combined assets or children, you could have a written agreement ahead of time that defines how you will handle those assets and the children and not have to involve the government. Why should you have to follow the government's rules for how your assets should be split up or who should have custody of the children? If you have a government marriage, then splitting up, aka getting a divorce, can make a bad situation even worse, involving a long, drawn-out court battle, costing you and your partner each thousands of dollars. Of course, most people getting married don't go into it thinking they'll break up, so tend to overlook that big negative aspect of getting a government marriage. For me personally, a big argument against government marriage is regarding the inequity it engenders. If most of society thinks that government marriages are the only legitimate form of marriage, then government is also the organization which decides who is and who is not allowed to get married. For example, some state and local governments have passed laws stating that gays and lesbians are or are specifically not allowed to get married. But who are they to make that kind of determination? If all marriage were private, and you wanted to have a marriage which was recognized by an organization, and one organization, maybe a particular church, didn't want to marry you, well, just go out and find a church which will recognize your marriage. The problem with government being involved with marriage, and as it is with anything it's involved with, is that government's rules are one size fits all. I think gays and lesbians are going about it the wrong way. Instead of fighting to be able to beg government for permission to get married, I think they should instead be fighting to get government out of the marriage business completely. And I would gladly join them in that fight. So, what are the alternatives to government-approved marriages? I kind of touched on this before, but if you feel your marriage won't be legitimate without it being recognized by some organization, then you could get married by a church, or maybe even by other organizations which perform marriages that I don't know about. Or, if you're just looking for the ceremony aspect, why even bother with an organization at all? Just get together with your friends and family, and your significant other, of course. Find somebody to perform a ceremony, which you've either written yourself or found online, and then throw a party afterwards. Another thing to consider is the financial aspects. If you plan on having any kind of joint assets, it would probably be a good idea to have some kind of written agreement which you could continually update as your circumstances change, which would define how your assets should be divided in case you ever split up. That's why I now recommend keeping as many of your accounts as possible separate, and only combine assets or accounts which you feel are absolutely necessary to. Then there's the situation of having children. That's always a tough issue, which government marriage and divorce doesn't make any easier. Again, the most prudent course of action is probably to have some kind of written agreement, which you can update as you have more children. And in it, you can amicably decide ahead of time how custody and/or visitation will work with the children. Anyway, as for me, if I could do it over again, I wouldn't have gotten a government marriage in the first place. But since I did, I'd like to get the government out of the arrangement as soon as is feasible. I still love Brooke and want to be with her. I just don't want the government to be in bed with us. So happy anniversary, baby. We're getting divorced from the government. I walked 16 1/3 miles today. Here are my GPS coordinates. This is Will Buchanan for blog.walkforliberty.com, signing off.